Welcome back to the Pacific Northwest and to Seattle. This morning we're in Roanoke Park, which is near the water in Seattle. As we look around here, you'll see we are on the bayside, and we've come here this morning because Roanoke Park has played a big part of the history of Boeing. Actually, you can probably just see over my shoulder here. There's a plaque on the wall here with a Boeing logo on it. This was the first flight of a Boeing aircraft took place from this park, right on this piece of water here. It was the Boeing B&W. It was a seaplane, and it first took flight in 1916. This is part of a pilgrimage we're doing today, so we've come around to look at some of the more unusual parts of Boeing history, and this is where it all started back in 1916. So follow us on our journey today, and we'll see where it takes us, and hopefully it will be of interest. So no trip to Seattle would be complete without coming down to the harbour and seeing the seaplanes. There's a beaver behind us here. I am having a bit of a chuckle about that. It's a childish thing, but I'm a pilot after all. This beaver, 1964, it's a private owner beaver. We are at the home of Ken Morair here. There are a huge amount of seaplanes here. Everything from a Citabria on floats, which is over the back here, to turbine otters, and this amazingly beautiful beaver owned by a private owner. 1964, as I say, and it just looks amazing. I'd love to have a go, but unfortunately not today because I've got to go and do some real flying later. So as a kid, I had commando books. For those of you who don't know what they were little small pamphlets which told the stories of World War II, whether you were a soldier, an airman, whatever. And in those books there was a number of aircraft that featured. Predominantly Spitfires and Hurricanes on the side of the Allies, and on the side of the Axis, if you want to call it that, the Germans were two aircraft, the Me-109 and the Focke-Wulf 190. I've seen lots of Me-109s in museums across the world. What I've never seen is a Focke-Wulf 190. This behind us here is a Focke-Wulf 190 that was found in 1980, which was fairly intact. And what they've managed to do here at the museum is literally bring it back to life. So this is now the only flyable Focke-Wulf 190. It was an amazing fighter at sort of medium to low altitudes, far better than the Messerschmitt 109 actually, at medium to low altitudes. Had a huge engine, a massive two 30mm cannons, and the capability of carrying a centerline bomb as well for bombing targets. Utterly astounded that I've actually been able to see one after all these years. An utterly beautiful aircraft. So if you were looking for a quick aircraft in 1941, this is the aircraft I've had. This is the Me-163 Comet. It held the speed record in 1941 of 624 miles an hour, which isn't really fast by modern standards, but actually was really fast around then, and this was competing with Spitfires and Hurricanes. It's a jet-powered aircraft, rocket-powered actually, It had a rocket, it would launch, rocket would last for 8 minutes, it would zoom up to the bomber formations, use its two 30mm cannons to attack the bomber formations. After 8 minutes, guess what? No fuel, no power, and then what it would do is it would glide all the way back down to the airfields or land in a field. It was a bit of a one-shot wonder really, but amazingly fast. Would go up and just pull apart the bomber formations very quickly and then land. So the aircraft behind us here is the Focke-Wulf 190D. I talked earlier about the Focke-Wulf 190 being one of my childhood aircraft that I remember from my childhood. The 190D was a very exceptional aircraft in that it had an extension towards the rear of the aircraft here to assist with the CFG, because it had a massive engine at the front, far more powerful than the BMW engines that went on the aircraft that powered the Focke-Wulf 190s prior to this. This aircraft was designed to go head-to-head with the Spitfires and the P-51 Mustang, and actually, in terms of performance, would have outperformed those aircraft quite easily, but due to the lack of training in the Luftwaffe pilots at the time and lack of experience, They never really managed to get the advantage that this aircraft gave them in terms of performance and turning performance. A real shame. This is the last aircraft of its kind anywhere in the world. A real shame. It is flyable, but unfortunately they don't fly it now because they're so worried that if it has an accident that it'll be lost forever. It is in truly immaculate condition. It does look like it's been bolted together by some buffoon, particularly at the back end here where they've put the aft extension on to help with the CFG of having the extra engine at the front. But a truly stunning aircraft, and bearing in mind this was built in 1943, late 43, early 44. Utterly amazing. If the Germans could have levered the advantage, it would have perhaps tipped the balance of the war. So we'll have heard of the P-51 Mustang, one just behind us here. Not unlike the Spitfire or the Hurricane, an amazing iconic aircraft. But we'll have many of you heard of the P-40. P-40 behind us here, an absolutely amazing looking aircraft. Many would say actually it looks a bit Hurricane-esque perhaps. The P-40 Tomahawk, this one predominantly flew in the Russian theatre. This actual aircraft was built in 1941, was sent off to Russia to fight in the Russian front up near Murmansk, protecting Murmansk from the Germans. It was downed due to a crash, actually, a landing crash, and was then refound in 1990 in Murmansk, and then was brought here in the late 90s and has been restored back to flying condition. Very famous for the Flying Tigers, if for those of you who remember that. And they were famous for the shark teeth, which is depicted here. An amazing looking aircraft, so I defy anyone to stand next to a UH-1 helicopter here and not think about Vietnam and the apocalypse now scene where they're coming across the beaches. This was the Swiss Army knife of helicopters really for the US Army. About 16,000 of these were delivered to the US Army. About 1,000 were gunships. This one here is an example of a gunship with rockets and the 7.62mm cannons on the side. An amazing helicopter. If you imagine this was a single engine helicopter working in a battlefield, particularly in Vietnam. There weren't that many losses actually, which is really surprising. The pilot in the gunship had a sight which they could use to sight the rockets and the cannons, which could swivel up and down, and the cannons could swivel from side to side. You can probably see the sight just here. It did obscure the vision of the non-handling pilot, but could be pulled away should there be any issues, so that the other pilot could fly around. Absolutely amazing. This one actually never saw any time in Vietnam. It was built just after the war and actually served with the US Army in Germany as part of the US forces in Europe. So this museum has a lot of unique aircraft. We've talked about lots of those as we've gone around the museum. This is another one. This is the F-105 Thunder Chief. So this aircraft was originally designed to do one thing: go really fast in a straight line with a pilot on it to deliver a nuclear weapon. An utterly amazing aircraft, was very good at that job. This one is the F-105G, which is a Wild Weasel variant, so an electronic warfare aircraft. So it had 2 seats. It had the pilot who sat in the front and the electronic warfare officer who sat in the back. This aircraft actually saw service in Vietnam and was actually the last Wild Weasel or electronic warfare aircraft to leave Vietnam and North Vietnam after the end of the war. Another unique example of an airplane which actually I've never seen before. I've seen a few 105 single seat ones, but I've never seen the Wild Weasel version. Utterly amazing. Beautiful aircraft. So we all know about the Merlin engine. The Merlin engine is in the Spitfire, it was in the Lancaster. Here's another aircraft with Merlin engines, 2 Merlin engines. This is the de Havilland Mosquito. This is a flyable version of the Mosquito. Back in 2016 they returned this to flying status. What was different about the Mosquito as a fighter? Well, actually, it was the only fighter really in World War II that was made of wood. So this entire fighter is predominantly made of balsa wood rather than steel. Had amazing guns, cannons at the front there, which you can see, but two huge Merlin engines, which made it a formidable fighter. I believe it's one of the last flying examples of the Mosquito around, and it just looks in pristine condition. This one was actually used as a trainer, never saw active service, but what they've done is they've put it back in to active service colours to allow it to be flown around, rather than in the original training colours. Couple of big Merlins. We all know that the Lysander was one of my favourite airplanes in World War II. Its SOE heritage, it was one of the first aircraft to have leading edge slats. Well, another one here, one of the second aircraft to have leading edge slats is the Fischler Storch. It was used in a very similar role to the Lysander in World War II, and you can actually see here with the wings folded, you can see that the leading edge slats deployed, which give this aircraft a massively short takeoff and landing run. And you know, the engineering that went into designing these leading edge slats at the time is still being used today for airliners to give them the additional lift that they need for takeoff and landing. It was thoroughly revolutionary at the time. Well, welcome back everyone. We're at one of the smaller museums in Seattle. This is the Museum of Flight's Restoration Museum, and they've got some amazing stuff in here. It is a working hangar, so we have to be very careful where we walk. To the side of us here is a Boeing aircraft. It has Boeing written on the side, but it was a Boeing aircraft that never flew. This is the one and the only mock-up of the Boeing supersonic aircraft. So it was the Boeing SST. This aircraft was 330 feet long-ish when it was built as a mock-up. They have 85 feet of the mock-up here, the front 85 feet of the aircraft. So the nose up at this end, this was actually one of the cargo holds. And as you can see, it's a metal aircraft. So this wasn't a plastic mock-up, this was the actual aircraft that they built with wings to demo the aircraft. It never flew, it was cancelled. As I'm sure you know, my previous video about the 747 will have told you about. It was the SST, this was the future, this and Concorde was the future of aviation, and we never thought that the Jumbo would take off. Literally, well actually it transpired being entirely the opposite. Although Concorde had a very successful career, the SST literally didn't get off the ground. It had a swing nose, very much like Concorde swing noses on the ground over there. A real shame to see actually such an amazing piece of aviation history in the hangar here. It's being restored. It is going to go to the Museum of Flight. I think that'll be a fantastic exhibit to see next to the 747, as their heritages are actually linked. Well, hi again. You join me on the Stratodeck at Paine Field. We've moved up a fantastic overview of the airfield here. But why we've actually come up onto the Stratodeck is actually to look at not the 787s that are across there or the 767s at Boeing Defence, but actually we've come across to look at the Dreamlifter. The Dreamlifter 747-400, specially adapted to carry the fuselage, the tail and the wings of the Dreamlifter. Sorry, of the Dreamliner. An amazing aeroplane, really only has 5 destinations that it goes to. Obviously it comes here to Seattle, it goes to Grotti in Italy, predominantly to pick up the tail fins. It goes to Wichita in Kansas, and Nagoya out in Japan actually to pick up the wings, and North Charleston in South Carolina as well. An absolutely amazing aeroplane, very similar in shape to the Airbus, the Beluga or the Beluga XL, but actually this is pressurized, which the Beluga isn't. An amazing aeroplane. Just thought I'd share that with you because everyone loves a Jumbo.